Okay, we're going to talk about animals and animal evolution. And why do we study this? Well, partly we study this is because Darwin talked about animal evolution. And since we are animals, we share characteristics, and all animals share a large number of characteristics, even though animals themselves are very diverse. And because many people are familiar with some common animals, they can understand what we're talking about. So this has a lot of slides, but hopefully we'll go through them kind of quickly and we'll be able to understand it. So what is an animal? Well, animals are eukaryotes. That means they have a cell with a nucleus. They are all multicellular. They develop from one cell that goes through mitosis, and then it becomes a hollow ball of cells. And then in all animals, that hollow ball forms a gut by having a pocket form and go all the way through. And then food will go into that pocket. And then animals also, they're the only organisms with muscle and nervous systems. And it appears that all animals share genes. And so this early development is similar. And then all animals share lots of traits. Okay. Animals first appear in the fossil record about 525 to 530 million years ago in old marine sediments. And this mountainside here is in Canada, and it's called the Burgess Shale. And it's when most major groups of animals first appear. And this is kind of late in the fossil record. There's lots of earlier fossils, but this is when animals first appear. And so we'll talk about these groups: Cnidaria, annelids, mollusks, arthropods, and echinoderms. Okay, I mentioned all animals share a lot of characteristics in early development, and we think that all the animal groups appeared at the same time because that's when they share a bunch of genes, and those genes became fixed in animals. We've kind of talked about these. These are the Hox genes, and these determine the head of the animal, body segments, limbs, kind of the front and back, and the development of animals. And so we think these animals, because they share these patterns of cleavage and embryonic development, and they share some anatomical features, we think they're all related. And so ancestral animals are related to other eukaryotes that are single-celled. And then we have groups including sponges, jellyfish, and corals, and then some different kinds of groups what I'll talk about. So the most primitive animals are sponges. They're all aquatic, most are marine. They lack symmetry, they lack organs, they lack even tissues. What they are is a couple different types of cells that function together. They can have a little bit of a skeletal system, a structure called a spicule, but it's basically a cell type, and there's 2 or 3 different types of cells, and these things all filter water. And so the primary cells are called choanocytes, and then amoebocytes come there. The DNA evidence suggests these are the most primitive animals and are related to single-celled eukaryotes. Okay, the first animals that have true symmetry and true tissues and organs are the cnidarians. These are jellyfish and sea anemones and corals. There are about 10 species, and again, mostly marine. They have a nervous system but no brain. It's called a nerve net. They have a gut cavity which has a single opening. They have stinging cells called nematocysts. You may have know this, like Portuguese man-o'-war and various sea wasps and things like that. And because they're mostly soft-bodied, there's few fossils until much, much later. But there are some impressions that show they were among the earliest animals. Okay, DNA evidence suggests that after the sponges, these are the most primitive animals. And they share more traits with other animals than the sponges do. Okay, all right. So the next big group of animals are really much more complex. These are the worms, the segmented worms called annelids, like earthworms and things like that. They have bilateral symmetry, which means they have a head and a tail. They have a bottom and a top. They have many, many segments, and they can sometimes have little appendages coming off of these segments. They have a ciliated larvae. Most of these guys are found in aquatic and marine systems, but many of them are terrestrial and are freshwater. They are fairly complex compared to more primitive animals. They have a gut with a mouth and an anus. They have respiratory organs, gills. They have a heart, blood vessels, excretory organs. They even have a brain and a ventral nerve cord. But they're relatively small for the most part and have to remain hidden. Now, the one big group of um, invertebrate animals without backbones that has some large organisms are the mollusks. There's over 100,000 different kinds of mollusks. These includes the clams, the snails, and nudibranchs and slugs. And the really advanced ones are like the octopus and squid and cuttlefish. These, like annelids, have ciliated larvae and well developed organs, but they also have three body regions: a head, foot, a visceral mass, and then they have an unusual feature called a mantle, which has its own body cavity. And most of these have shells and are relatively inactive, but some are large and active and abundant, particularly the squid and octopi. Their fossils go all the way back to the Cambrian, and DNA suggests they're closely related to annelids and are fairly complex. Okay, so then there's one great group of animals, and this term you don't have to know, Ecdysoa. This includes two phylum, and these are contain millions and millions of species that are mostly small but very, very abundant, so trillions of animals, and they're all covered by a cuticle that they shed during molting, and this can form like an exoskeleton, and it's made out of something called chitin. Okay, and so this includes lots of extinct forms, but also lots of living animals like insects, crabs, scorpions, and things like that. Okay, some of them you may not know, but you may know them as roundworms. These are nematodes. They're worm-like in that they don't have appendages, but they do have that cuticle that serves as their exoskeleton, and they're closely related to the arthropods. Okay, and but not closely related to annelids or mollusks. And then, of course, the great class of arthropods. Most of all animal species are arthropods. The majority of animals' biomass in any habitat is an arthropod, although they can be extremely small. Their cuticle is on the outside of their body and it forms a skeleton. It can form jointed legs, wings, mouth parts, antenna, and things like that. And they have respiratory organs and circulatory organs. They have brains, and their fossils go way back, even before the Cambrian. And so their DNA shows that they're closely related. Okay, the arthropods we know best are the insects. Okay, they're the most successful terrestrial group because they have wings, they have three pair of legs, and millions of individuals. Okay, so the next group of organisms isn't that big, but it's kind of closely related to us. These are the echinoderms, and they're really weird organisms. As adults, they have five-part or pentaradial symmetry, but their larvae have bilateral symmetry, and they have an internal or endoskeleton, and they have a hydraulic system for movement. It's called the water vascular system. These include common fossils that go all the way back to the Cambrian period, and they develop differently from the other animals like cnidarians, annelids, mollusks, and ecdysoa. They're called deuterostomes, which means they form a gut in a different way. And they're closely related to other organisms that form their gut like this, which are the vertebrates. Here's an adult echinoderm, and that water vascular system that produces the tube feet, or here they call it they show the radial canals and the ampulla. Echinoderms don't look like much as adults, but their larvae are more active in swimming. Okay, the last big group are the chordates. Okay, there are 500,000, or it's not 500, 50,000 species of chordate, And like the echinoderms, they have an internal skeleton, which is either a notochord or a vertebrae. And they have very well developed organs and are advanced animals. They're familiar to all of us. They're the fish, reptiles, amphibians, and birds and mammals. These include virtually all the large active animals that are dominant in most habitats. Okay, the chordates are closely related to one another and they form their embryos in similar ways. There are also intermediates, fossilists, that link the different chordate groups, the fish to the amphibians, and the amphibians to the reptiles, and the reptiles to the birds. And we can also study their anatomy and their embryos. The features that link all the chordates are a nerve cord, an endoskeleton of notochord or vertebral column, pharyngeal slits that develop into gills in fish or other organs in other vertebrate embryos, and then they have a postanal tail. Okay, so to summarize, the oldest animal fossils come from marine sediments over 500 million years old. Animals appear late in the fossil record, particularly complex animals. All major invertebrate groups appear in the fossil record during the Cambrian explosion, about 530 million years ago. All animals share many features: muscle, nerve tissue, symmetry, early embryonic development, and gut formation. Most animals have bilateral symmetry at some point in their life cycle. Simple animal groups have radial symmetry. The most species-rich groups have an exoskeleton of chitin. These are the arthropods and roundworms. They are small but extremely numerous. Large, complex animals are the chordates. They share 4 features: a dorsal hollow nerve tube, a notochord, pharyngeal gill slits, and a postanal tail. Okay, we'll talk about this last group more in the next program.